The chrome walls of the Galactic Military Academy's primary training chamber gleamed under harsh artificial suns, casting long shadows across rows of seated alien cadets. Chittering laughter echoed from the Zephyrian delegates, their scaled heads bobbing in amusement as they gestured toward the lone human figure seated in the back corner. The Vorthan cadets, massive and furred, rumbled their approval of the jokes being passed around in a dozen alien tongues. Instructor Velter, towering Kreok, with eyes like molten copper, surveyed his mixed-species class with predatory satisfaction. His mandibles clicked as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of military authority across multiple star systems. Today, we separate the apex species from the expendable ones. The human woman sat motionless, her dark eyes fixed on the instructor, while alien cadets whispered and postured around her. She remained silent, her calloused hands resting calmly on her knees. To them, she appeared fragile soft skin, no claws, no natural armor, no visible weapons, just another Death Welder who had somehow convinced the Council that humans deserved a seat among the stars. Attention! Cadets Veltar's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a plasma blade. Your final examination begins now. Bioengineered hunters from the Torgan sector will be released into this chamber. Your task is simple. Survive the next hour. The massive blast doors at the chamber's far end began to iris open with a grinding mechanical shriek. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson as the instructor's cruel laughter echoed off the walls. These predators were designed to hunt the most dangerous prey in known space. They have never failed to claim their target. The first shadow moved in the doorway, something massive, with too many joints and eyes that reflected the red light like mirrors. Then another, and another. The Vorthan cadets, despite their size and strength, began to edge toward the emergency exits, their fur bristling with instinctive fear. The creatures that emerged from the darkness defied easy description. Each stood 7 feet tall on 4 legs that ended in claws capable of shearing through starship hull plating. Their elongated skulls housed rows of crystalline teeth designed to pierce even the toughest natural armor. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along their scaled hides, a hypnotic display meant to disorient prey in their final moments. Panic exploded through the chamber. The Zephyrian cadets scrambled toward the walls, their usual arrogance replaced by ancestral terror. The Vorthans, despite their warrior culture, began a tactical retreat that looked suspiciously like a rout. Smaller species simply dove for cover behind overturned furniture and training equipment. But the human woman stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and calm. Around her, cadets fled in every direction, but she remained in place, watching the predators with the calculating gaze of someone assessing a problem to be solved. Her hand closed around a broken chair leg that had been discarded during the chaos. A piece of metal and polymer about the length of her forearm, with jagged edges where it had snapped free from its base. The nearest predator locked onto her immediately, drawn by her stillness in a sea of panicked movement. Its bioluminescent patches flared brighter as it stalked forward, confident in its genetic programming. These creatures had been tested against the fiercest warriors of 100 species. None had ever survived the first encounter. The human woman tilted her head slightly, watching the way the creature moved, its weight distribution, the rhythm of its breathing, the slight favor it showed to its right foreleg. She had grown up in places where hesitation meant death, where reading an opponent's weakness was the difference between eating and starving. When the predator lunged, she was already moving, not away toward it. The chair leg swept up in a brutal arc, catching the creature's lower jaw with a sickening crack that echoed through the chamber. Alien blood, dark purple and thick as oil, sprayed across the training floor as the predator's head snapped sideways with inhuman force. The stunned predator staggered, its perfect killing machine temporarily reduced to confusion and pain. But the human woman was already there, following up her first strike with methodical efficiency. The jagged end of the chair leg found the soft tissue behind the creature's skull plates, punching through with a wet, tearing sound. Around the chamber, surviving cadets pressed themselves against walls and stared in shock. This wasn't how the stories went. Humans were supposed to be weak, dependent on technology and tools. They weren't supposed to improvise weapons from furniture and drive them through the skulls of genetically perfected hunters. As the first predator collapsed in a spreading pool of its own blood, the human woman was already turning toward the next threat. Her movements had a practiced quality that spoke of hard-won experience, not the desperate flailing of someone lucky, but the calculated efficiency of a survivor who had learned to kill with whatever came to hand. The remaining predators paused, their advanced olfactory systems detecting something unexpected in the air. The pheromone signature of fear had shifted. It was no longer coming from their designated prey, it was coming from the other direction. From the corners where alien cadets huddled, watching this impossible reversal with growing terror, the human woman rolled her shoulders, testing the weight of her improvised weapon. The chair leg was slick with alien blood now, but she adjusted her grip automatically. Behind her, a Vorthan cadet, who had been particularly vocal about human weakness, was now pressed against the wall, his massive frame trembling as he whispered prayers in his native tongue. When the second predator charged, she met it head-on again. This time, she used the creature's own momentum against it, sidestepping at the last moment and driving her weapon into its flank with enough force to crack ribs. The predator's roar of pain and rage was answered by something even more terrifying, the human woman's own voice, raised in a wordless battle cry that carried every ounce of rage and defiance her species had ever felt. Instructor Veltar watched from his observation booth, his mandibles clicking nervously as his grand demonstrations spiraled beyond his control. The predators were supposed to eliminate the weaker species quickly and efficiently, leaving only the strong to continue their training. Instead, the weakest-looking member of the class was systematically dismantling his carefully selected killers. The third predator fell when she somehow wedged the chair leg into its mouth and used leverage to snap its neck with an audible crack. The fourth died when she found a power conduit cable and used it to strangle the creature while it thrashed helplessly against the metal furniture she had trapped it behind. By the time the fifth predator approached her, the others had learned to give her space. They circled at a distance, their perfect predatory instincts warring with the growing recognition that something was fundamentally wrong with their prey assessment algorithms. This small, soft creature was radiating the kind of aggressive confidence they typically associated with apex pack leaders. The chair leg finally snapped in half during her fight with the sixth predator, the metal fatigue and repeated impacts finally exceeding its structural limits. For a moment, the watching cadets thought she was finished disarmed and facing creatures that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds. Instead, she looked at the broken weapon in her hands and smiled. The jagged break had left her with two pieces, one a shorter handle with sharp metal spurs, the other a longer shaft with a wicked point where the break had created fresh edges. She tested both weapons with quick movements, then advanced on the remaining predators with renewed confidence. The seventh predator died when she used the pointed shaft like a spear, driving it completely through the creature's eye socket and into what passed for its brain. The eighth fell to a combination attack that left it bleeding from multiple wounds, before she finished it with the shorter piece, using it like a dagger to open its throat. When the last predator finally fell, the emergency lighting seemed to dim, casting the chamber in deeper shadows. The human woman stood among the carnage, breathing hard but still upright. Her clothes were torn and stained with alien blood, her hair matted with gore, but her eyes remained bright and alert. The surviving cadets stared at her in absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the academy based on size, natural weapons, evolutionary advantages had just been shattered by a single human with broken furniture. Instructor Veltar's voice came over the chamber's speakers, hoarse and uncertain. Training exercise concluded, but everyone present understood that what they had witnessed was no exercise. It was a revelation that would echo through the corridors of power across the galaxy. Within hours, secure communications channels throughout the academy carried whispered reports of what had happened in Training Chamber 7. The story grew with each telling. Some claimed she had killed dozens of predators, others that she had torn them apart with her bare hands. But the core truth remained consistent. A single human had done the impossible. The Galactic Council's military advisors found themselves facing an uncomfortable question. If this was what humans could accomplish when cornered and armed with debris, what might they achieve with proper preparation and equipment? The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. Emergency sessions were called, threat assessments were revised, and somewhere in the depths of space, alien civilizations that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence began to take a very different view of their newest galactic neighbors. When classes resumed the next day, the dynamics had fundamentally changed. The human woman, now referred to in hushed tones as the chair leg slayer, found her usual seat surrounded by empty space, not because she was being shunned, but because every alien cadet now understood instinctively that she commanded respect through demonstrated lethality. The Vorthan cadets, proud warriors who had never bowed to anyone, now nodded acknowledgement when she entered a room. The Zephyrians, whose entire culture was built around intellectual superiority, found themselves studying her movements with scientific fascination rather than contempt. She still carried the broken chair leg, now cleaned and sharpened to a more effective point, not as a trophy, but as a reminder both to herself and to others that humans could not be safely dismissed as harmless. The Academy's teaching staff struggled to adapt their curriculum to account for what they had learned. Combat simulations were revised, psychological profiles were updated. The entire foundation of their understanding about species capabilities had shifted, and they weren't sure how to proceed. Meanwhile, recruitment requests for human personnel began flooding in from across the galaxy. Military units that had never shown interest in human soldiers suddenly wanted to know if more like her were available. The economic implications alone were staggering. Entire species had just elevated its market value through a single act of defiance. But perhaps most significantly, the whispered conversations in Academy corridors now carried a different tone. Instead of casual dismissal of human capabilities, there was genuine concern about what would happen when humanity decided to expand beyond its current borders. She didn't see herself as starting a revolution. In her mind, she had simply refused to die when death was expected of her. It was a natural response, learned from a childhood spent in places where survival wasn't guaranteed and weakness wasn't tolerated. But revolutions rarely begin with grand declarations. They begin with single acts of defiance that inspire others to reconsider what's possible. Every human in the Academy now walked a little taller, spoke a little louder, demanded a little more respect. The alien cadets noticed. Their instructors noticed, and slowly, inevitably, the power structures that had seemed immutable began to shift. The Galactic Council's emergency session lasted 3 days. Military strategists, xenobiologists, political analysts, all struggled with the same question. Was humanity a threat to be contained, or an asset to be courted? Some argued for immediate restrictions on human expansion, claiming that a species capable of such violence couldn't be trusted with advanced technology. Others pushed for immediate alliance negotiations, insisting that having humans as enemies would be far more dangerous than having them as friends. The debate raged on, but one fact remained clear to all participants. Humanity could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The galaxy had a new player, and that player had announced its presence with blood and broken furniture. Months later, the story had spread to every inhabited system in the galaxy. In some versions, the human had killed 100 predators with her bare hands. In others, she had torn apart the training chamber itself and used the debris as weapons. But every version agreed on the essential truth. When cornered, humans didn't break, they became something even predators feared. Military academies across the galaxy began including human case studies in their curricula. The chair leg incident became required reading for officers who might encounter human forces in the field. And somewhere, in the depths of space, civilizations that had never heard of Earth began making contingency plans. The human woman herself remained largely unaware of her growing legend. She continued her training, improved her skills, and prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. The broken chair leg sat on her desk as a reminder and a promise. She would never again be underestimated. The Academy's graduation ceremony that year was unlike any in its history. When the human woman's name was called, the entire assembly rose in acknowledgement. Not applause, respect, the kind of respect normally reserved for proven warriors and decorated veterans. She walked across the stage in dress uniform, the traditional weapons of a dozen species hanging from her belt. But attached to her side, polished and sharpened to a perfect edge, was the chair leg that had started it all. A reminder that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one nobody expects. As she accepted her commission as a full officer in the Galactic Defense Force, alien dignitaries in the audience were already calculating the political implications. Humanity had just earned its place at the table, and everyone present understood that the galaxy would never be quite the same. Years passed. The human woman, now commander-led, mixed-species units with quiet authority earned through demonstrated competence. Her tactics manual became required reading at military academies across the galaxy, and her approach to improvised warfare revolutionized combat doctrine for multiple civilizations. But sometimes, late at night when the stars wheeled overhead and the universe felt vast and cold, she would take out the chair leg and remember that moment when everything changed, when she had looked at impossible odds and decided that dying was simply not acceptable. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity that day, but more importantly, humanity had learned to respect itself. They were no longer the weak newcomers begging for scraps at the galactic table. They were the species that turned furniture into weapons and predators into corpses when the situation demanded it. And in the end, that made all the difference. We are human, we endure, and when cornered, we fight.